The queen managed empires. The twins managed her. The sovereign conclave of Veloras met once every 12 planetary rotations, and each time it did, Empress Zavriel Orathan sat at its head and dismantled whatever argument her subordinates had spent the previous 11 rotations building. She was good at it. She had always been good at it. The art of taking apart a plan while offering nothing immediately to replace it, the art of deferral, of prolonged consideration, of watching her counselors recalibrate in real time, was one she had been practicing since she was 17 and her mother first showed her the throne room and said, "You will never truly own this room. You will only ever rent it from the people who believe in you." Her mother had been a pragmatist. Zavriel supposed she was, too, in her way. She was thinking about this, about her mother, about the throne, about the particular texture of the word *pragmatist, and how it managed to sound like an insult even when applied to oneself. When the door to her private receiving chamber opened, and Counselor Dren announced, without ceremony, that the human attachés from the Joint Administrative Commission had arrived and were waiting in the anteroom. "Both of them," Zavriel said. "Both of them," Dren said. He paused. "They brought calendars." Zavriel closed her eyes, then she opened them. Then she said, "I'll see them tomorrow," and returned to the document she had been reviewing, which was a 17-page summary of a trade dispute she had already decided how to resolve 3 weeks ago, but had not yet formally adjudicated because there were 12 other decisions sitting behind it, and she had long since learned that if you moved through your decision queue too quickly, people stopped preparing and simply waited for you to tell them what to think. The humans arrived on a morning when the outer garden was doing something extraordinary with the light, the Veloran sun hitting the night-flowering varieties at an angle that turned the pale blooms briefly gold before the flowers closed for the day. And Zavriel, who was reviewing the morning briefing from her window alcove, saw their shuttle coming in over the eastern ridge and thought, "They're early." The Joint Administrative Commission had sent too. This was not unusual. The Compact of 17 orbits had established exchange attachés as a condition of the trade protocols, and the Commission's standard practice was pairs, 1 data analyst, 1 relational reader, the theory being that the empire under examination yielded better information to 2 complementary observers than to 1 exhaustive one. What was unusual was that these particular 2 were twins. She had read their files. Soren Alec and Kale Alec, both 34 standard years, born 40 minutes apart on Earth's North Continent winter coast. Soren held 3 credentials in administrative systems analysis. Kale held 2 in cross-cultural communication, and 1 in what his file called *organizational behavioral mapping*, which was a precise way of saying he spent his professional life watching people and building accurate models of why they did what they did. She had read their files and then she had thought, "I will see them tomorrow," and then she had pushed the appointment back another 9 days. On the 3rd day of the Alec twins' residence in the palace's guest wing, Soren Alec laid out, on the long table in the workroom they had claimed, every document they had been able to obtain from the Central Archive. He arranged them by category: trade approvals, internal calendar records, administrative decision logs, the resource allocation ledgers going back 6 quarters, the dispute arbitration summaries for the past 2 years. Then he made a separate pile of the documents his archive request had retrieved but which contained, in the header field designated authorized by asterisk, a single notation: "See attached delegation order." The pile of delegated authorization documents was nearly 3 times as tall as the standard pile. Kale was sitting across from him, reading the internal calendar records, which were interesting in a specific way. They listed, for each scheduled meeting, the attendees who had confirmed, the attendees who had sent deputies, and the attendees who had neither confirmed nor sent word. "She doesn't attend most of her own calendar," he said. 40%, Soren said. He had already done the calculation. Of that 40%, she speaks at about 60% of the meetings. So she's present and engaged at roughly a quarter of her scheduled obligations. That's the official calendar. Soren tapped the delegation pile. The decisions still get made, the trade routes get approved, the disputes get arbitrated, the resource allocations go through. He looked at his brother. It runs. The empire runs exactly as well as it should run given its structure, possibly better. Kale set down the calendar records. He understood what Soren was not saying. She built a machine, he said. She built a very good machine, and then she got out of the way of it. Why? That, Soren said, is the question the file can't answer. Kale picked up a separate document, the Empress's personal schedule, as distinct from the official administrative calendar. He had requested it separately, under the JAC's right of full administrative access, with the careful framing of asterisk logistical accommodation planning. It listed her actual movements through the palace, which rooms she used, at which hours, for how long. The garden appeared on it frequently. The early morning hours, before the administrative day began. She goes to the garden a lot, he said. Garden isn't in any of the administrative documents, Soren said. No, Kale agreed. It's where she goes when she isn't administrating. He set down the schedule, which is most of the time. He was quiet for a moment, the particular silence that meant he was assembling something. She's not avoiding the work because she can't do it. She's avoiding the work because she's decided on some level that the machine doesn't need her, and she hasn't examined whether that's actually true. Is it true? Kale thought about the delegation pile. About 40% attendance and 60% engagement, and an empire that ran beautifully without its empress in any room. Parts of it, he said, but not the parts she thinks. The humans had been on Veloras for 43 days when Zavriel finally received them, partly because Counselor Dren had flagged 3 separate times that the Commission would interpret continued deferral as a diplomatic signal she did not intend, and partly because she had, from her window alcove, watched the twins for several mornings as they walked the East Colonnade before the administrative day began and found their rhythm. One slightly ahead, scanning. The other with his attention directed outward at the palace's architecture and personnel, and had decided, without being able to say precisely why, that these were not people who would waste her time. The receiving chamber was a long room with walls the color of deep water, lit from above by suspended crystal panels that refracted the morning light into cold, clean bands across the dark floor. Her consideration seat, the Veloran ruling chair, called thus because the word throne implied a permanence that Veloran governance philosophy actively resisted, sat on a raised platform at the far end, cushioned in the pale gray of the Second Dynasty. She was standing beside it, not sitting when they were shown in. She was always standing when people entered. It was a small habit that gave her half a second's advantage in the read. You caught more, seeing them cross a whole room toward you, than you caught face-to-face at a table. What she caught, watching the Alec twins cross her receiving chamber, they moved with the synchronized unconsciousness of people who had long since stopped needing to coordinate their bodies. Not identical movement. The one on the left walked with the slight forward lean of someone accustomed to being first into unknown rooms. The one on the right kept his shoulders back, his head at a neutral angle, his eyes making a sweep of the chamber's dimensions before settling on her. 2 different kinds of attention, operating in parallel, covering between them the room's entire breadth. She had been briefed on them. She knew their credentials. What she had not been able to calibrate from the file was the particular quality of their stillness when they stopped moving, not the performed stillness of people who had been trained to appear patient, but the actual thing, settled into them from inside. Empress? The one on the left inclined his head at the precise angle Veloran custom required. He had done his research. I'm Soren Alec. This is my brother Kale. We're grateful for the time. You've been here 43 days, she said, What have you been doing? The other one, Kale, almost smiled. Not quite, but close. Reading, he said. Reading what? Your administrative record for the past 2 years. Trade approvals, dispute logs, internal calendar, resource allocation ledgers. He paused, and in the pause she became aware that he was deciding whether to say the next thing. He decided to say it. Your attendance record. Zavriel looked at him. The quality of his attention, she noted, was the same whether he was deciding to say something or actually saying it, equally present, equally undramatic. My attendance record, she repeated. You have a very efficient empire, Soren said. He said it the way a diagnostician stated a symptom, with clinical precision and no visible investment in how she received it. We've been trying to understand the structure. And do you, she asked, understand it? The twins exchanged a look. It was brief, less than a second, and conducted at a register she couldn't quite read, which bothered her in a way she noticed and then set aside. Something passed between them that functioned like a full sentence compressed into glance and posture. Not yet, Kale said, but we'd like to. Zavriel looked at them for a moment. They looked back with that settled attention, present without pressure, interested without appetite. She had spent 41 years learning to calibrate what people wanted from her, because what people wanted from her shaped what they would do with what she gave them. The people who wanted the most were always the easiest, because desire made you predictable. The people who were difficult were the ones who wanted nothing more specific than to understand. Those people were difficult because they were honest. Sit down, she said. She gave them an hour. She had intended 40 minutes, but somewhere in the second half of the session, she had asked Soren a question about the Commission's structural reporting framework, and he had answered in a way that produced a follow-up question she hadn't planned, and the follow-up question produced 2 more, and at the end of it she realized the hour was gone, and she had been the one doing most of the talking. She reflected on this afterward, standing at the window alcove while Dren brought her the afternoon briefing. She was not, as a rule, a person who let an initial meeting run over. She was the opposite. She was precise about time because she had found, over 4 decades, that the best meetings were the ones where you arrived, made the necessary decisions, and left before the conversation could dilute into the things people said when they were trying to use the meeting for something other than its stated purpose. The hour with the Alec twins had not diluted. It had, somehow, concentrated. She thought about the specific question Kale had asked, near the end, about the Orvask crisis of 30 years ago. He had asked it carefully. Not why did you step back after Orvask asterisk, which would have been presumptuous, but what did the Orvask period change about how you understood your administrator's capacity for independent function? And she had answered the version he asked rather than the version she heard underneath it, and had known while she was answering that this was exactly the kind of skilled deflection that made him smile almost imperceptibly and write something in his notebook. He had a notebook, paper, not a data pad. He had been writing in it throughout the meeting, in handwriting she couldn't read from across the table, and he had not once looked down at it while he was writing. Only when he looked at what he had written, which was brief, as if confirming that his hand had done accurately what his mind intended. She found she was curious about the notebook. She found she was curious about the man. She pushed both observations to the side of her attention and returned to the afternoon briefing. The nature of the arrangement revealed itself over the following 3 weeks, not all at once but in increments. The way the shape of a coastline clarifies as a ship approaches, first as a smear of color on the horizon, then as an outline, then as something specific enough to navigate by. The empire ran because her senior administrators ran it. This was not by itself a problem. What Soren's documentation revealed, the charts he began leaving in her outer office, initially without explanation, then with brief typed annotations, was that the empire did not merely run through her administrators. It had, over the past 2 decades, reorganized itself around their absence of oversight. Structures that were supposed to be temporary had become permanent. Approval chains that should have flowed upward had looped sideways, creating a network of interdependent fiefdoms. Benign fiefdoms largely, but fiefdoms nonetheless. Cale's documentation was different. He produced not charts but annotated summaries of conversations. Every meeting he attended, every senior administrator he spoke with. The content of what they said layered against his analysis of what they had been trying to tell him versus what they had actually said. He had a particular notation system, a series of symbols in the margins that she eventually decoded as his indicators of asterisk stated objective asterisk, asterisk actual objective asterisk, and unstated anxiety. The unstated anxieties were consistent across every senior administrator she had. They were all, in one form or another, afraid of the same thing, that she would come back. Not because they wanted to do wrong by her. Because they had, in her extended absence, built lives and identities and systems of meaning around their portfolios, and the return of active imperial oversight would require them to restructure in ways they had stopped believing were necessary. "They're not bad at their jobs," she said, one morning in the workroom, reviewing Cale's annotations on a summary of his conversation with Counselor Avieth. "They're very good at their jobs." "Yes," he said, "that's part of what makes it complicated." Avieth has been with this administration for 22 years. She restructured the Southern Cluster Trade Protocols in the 14th year. She did it without being asked, and the restructuring was correct, and it's been running efficiently ever since. She set down the summary. "What I am supposed to do about that?" "What do you think you're supposed to do about it?" Cale asked. She looked at him. It was the third time in a week he had turned her question back on itself, and she had noticed the pattern and had decided she did not object to it, which was itself information about something. "I think," she said slowly, "that she's given me no grounds for criticism and every reason to be grateful. I think she has also, in the process of being competent and loyal and genuinely good at her work, made herself into a structure that has replaced me." She paused. "And I don't know whether the correct response to that is gratitude, correction, or both." "Both," Soren said from his corner, without looking up from his charts. "Just sequenced right." Cale looked at his brother with the expression of a man who has been slightly preempted but does not mind. "Gratitude first," he said. "Real gratitude acknowledged properly. Then, separately, the conversation about what active oversight looks like from here. They're two different conversations. Collapsing them makes the second one feel like a rebuke." Zavriel considered this. It was the kind of advice she would have given, 30 years ago, to a junior administrator. It was the kind of advice she had stopped needing, because she had stopped being in situations that required it. "And you think I can do that?" she said. "Walk back into rooms I haven't been in for 20 years, and have both of those conversations without it feeling like an occupation." "We think," Cale said, "that you can do it if you take the right amount of time to prepare and let us help you build the sequence." He paused. "And we think you should do it, because the alternative is a very efficient empire that is gradually ceasing to be your empire in any meaningful sense." "Is that in your report?" she asked. "Parts of it will be," Soren said. He did look up now briefly. "The structural observations, the projections, the administrative recommendations." He looked at Cale and back at her. "The other parts are not in any report." They started with the Southern Cluster reviews. The Southern Cluster was the most active trade zone in the Empire, 7 inhabited systems, 4 active resource extraction contracts, 2 ongoing border demarcations, and a perpetual low-grade dispute between 2 of the habitation councils about water access rights. Counselor Avieth had managed it personally for 11 years. The reviews happened monthly. Zavriel had not attended one in 6 years. Soren spent 10 days preparing her. He pulled every Southern Cluster document going back 3 years, organized it into themes and sequences, identified the 6 questions that, if she asked them in the right order, would demonstrate to the room that she was not simply attending but had read everything. He briefed her twice. The second time, she interrupted him 14 minutes in and answered his next 4 questions before he asked them. "All right," he said, "you have the data." "I always had the data," she said. "I have staff who summarize the data. The data isn't what I've been missing." "What have you been missing?" She thought about it. "The asterisk texture of it," she said. "Summaries flatten. The room shows you what a summary can't, which way people's eyes go when a specific name is mentioned, which problems they talk around, what they say in the last 5 minutes when they think the meeting is over and they're starting to relax." She looked at the window. "I was very good at reading rooms 20 years ago. I don't know if I still am." "You read us on day 1, Cale said. He had come in midway through the session. She was not certain when, exactly, which was not typical of her awareness. "I read that you were observers," she said. "I didn't read how much." "You read enough to let us in earlier than you intended," he said. "The appointment was on the calendar for day 44. You moved it up a day." He paused. "You moved it up because something in the pattern of what we were doing changed your assessment. That's room reading. The specific skill isn't gone. You've just been practicing it on the wrong scale, reading the palace instead of the meeting." She looked at him. He was right. She did not always enjoy being seen to be right when someone else had arrived there first, but she had long since decided this was a vanity she could not afford in an advisor. "All right," she said. "How early do we arrive?" 12 minutes, Soren said. She arrived 11 minutes and 50 seconds before the Southern Cluster Review was scheduled to begin, sat at the far end of the table, poured herself water from the standing carafe, and opened the briefing materials. By the time the first deputy arrived, Aviath's deputy, a young administrator named Sir Call who had been in the position for 3 years, Zavriel had been reading for 7 minutes and did not look up when the door opened, which meant Sir Call came all the way to his chair before he registered that the Empress was at the far end of the table, and then had a moment of visible recalibration that she caught in her peripheral vision without turning her head. By the time Counselor Aviath arrived, 5 minutes later, there were 4 people in the room, and they all had the particular stillness of people who know that something has already changed and are waiting to understand what it means. Aviath herself paused at the threshold. Just slightly, a half-second hesitation at the weight of the room, and then she moved to her chair with the smooth authority of someone who had been running this table for 11 years. "Empress," she said, neutral, professionally warm. "Counselor," Zavriel said. She closed the briefing materials and folded her hands on them. "I've been reviewing the third-quarter water access mediation from the Orvith-Callis dispute. Page 41. The mediator's proposed resolution cites the Veloran Standard of Equivalent Use, but the relevant section of the standard was amended in the 40th year of my reign. The amendment restricts equivalent use claims in cases of seasonal extraction, which is exactly what the Callis Council is doing." She paused. "Is the mediation team working with the pre-amendment text?" The room was very quiet. Aviath looked at her deputy. Sir Call produced his data pad and scrolled with a controlled urgency that told her he was looking for something he was not confident he would find. He found it, or rather, he found the absence of it. She watched his face change by a fraction. "The mediation team was provided the standard as it stood at the time the original dispute was filed," Sir Call said carefully. "I'll need to check whether the amendment was flagged in the provision package." "Please do," Zavriel said. "The amendment changes the viable resolution paths. If the mediation team proposes a settlement under the pre-amendment framework, the Orvith Council will challenge it and will spend the next 18 months in the arbitration queue." She opened her materials again. "Let's continue with the extraction contract renewals. I have some questions about the timeline on Karath 7. The meeting lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes, which was 50 minutes longer than usual. She asked 11 questions. 3 were from Soren's briefing list. The other 8 arrived from the live texture of the room, from the way certain answers generated new angles she had not prepared, and she followed them without hesitation, not because she had remembered how to do this, but because, apparently, the ability had simply been waiting like the garden varieties in the second row, closing every morning and reopening every dusk, consistently, without requiring her to tend them. Cale was in the workroom when she returned. He had not attended the meeting. She had made this choice herself, had told him she wanted her read of the room uncontaminated by the additional variable of his presence in it. He was sitting in his usual chair, the history book closed on the table beside him, and he looked up when she came in with the same quality of waiting she had come to recognize. Not anxious, not impatient, simply the attention of someone whose interest was genuine. "How many of the 11 were from the briefing list?" he asked. 3. A pause. "Good," he said, quietly, as if the word cost something and he was careful with it. "Aviath is going to restructure the mediation team's documentation protocols," she said. "Not because I told her to. I said nothing about structure, but she knows now that I'm going to ask questions she hasn't anticipated, and she is too precise an administrator not to close the gaps before I ask again." She sat down across from him. "You were right about that." "Soren was right about that," Cale said. "He modeled it in week 3. I just agreed with him." "Don't do that," she said. He looked at her. "Don't deflect credit when credit is accurate," she said. "You told me that people adjust to the weight of consistent attention. That was yours. Take it." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You're right, I said it, I'll take it." She had the thought. It arrived the way certain thoughts did, simply and without drama, that she had been in a great many rooms with a great many competent people over 4 decades, and very few of them had been able to accept a direct correction and simply incorporate it. Most of them did something with it, minimized it or reciprocated it or stored it as a grievance or performed a gratitude that was really embarrassment. He just incorporated it. "Something else," she said. "Yes." "I missed it." She said it clearly without hedging. "The meeting, the room, being in a room where decisions were actually being made. I'd forgotten." She paused. "I had told myself I'd delegated because I trusted my administrators. That was true. But I had also delegated because somewhere around year 20 it had become easier to manage the perception of my presence than to actually be present. An empress who never appears in the wrong place or at the wrong time is an empress who isn't in enough places." He was watching her with the same complete attention. "When did you first understand that?" "Just now, I think," she said. "In that room, asking the 8th question, the one about the Kareth-7 extraction timeline that wasn't on Soren's list, and following the thread without knowing exactly where it would go." She looked at the window, at the garden outside, the closed blooms of the mid-morning. "I hadn't had that feeling in a long time, the feeling of following a thread." "What does it feel like?" "Like I'm actually here," she said, "rather than managing from the distance of here." Cale made a note in his notebook. She watched his hand move. "What are you writing?" she asked. "A reminder," he said, "that the most useful data often arrives when the person being observed believes they are simply talking." She looked at him steadily. "Am I your subject?" "No," he said. He looked up. "You are the context in which I'm trying to understand something." "And what are you trying to understand?" He held her gaze. "Whether the person who built this empire is still inside it," he said, and the answer appears to be yes. The sovereign conclave of Veloras met on the 43rd rotation of the administrative calendar, as it always did, and this time something was different. The difference was not dramatic. It was not a formal announcement, or a reorganization of the chamber's seating arrangement, or any of the signals that usually preceded a significant shift in Veloran governance. The difference was simply that the Empress arrived 7 minutes before the session was called, sat in her consideration seat, and opened the briefing materials. She had been doing this for 4 months. The conclave members who had served for the past 20 years had, over those 4 months, recalibrated by degrees, in the way of people who do not quite believe that a pattern is real until they have seen it replicated enough times that disbelief becomes its own kind of work. By the 3rd month, the conclave's preparation quality had changed measurably. By the 4th, 3 senior members had requested additional briefing materials from their own offices before sessions, unprompted. This particular session concerned a contested resource allocation in the outer systems and a new border delineation proposal from the 7th Orbital District. Neither was straightforward. Both had been sitting in the pending queue for longer than they should have, because the conclave, in the years of Zavriel's reduced attendance, had learned a specific behavioral pattern: bring the problem, document the deliberation, and wait for someone in the administrative chain to make the call. The call usually arrived eventually. It simply did not always arrive from the person whose formal authority required it. Zavriel had read both files. She had spent an evening with each of them, actual evenings, in the window alcove with the light at the angle she found useful for reading, not delegated to a summary but read directly. She had annotated them. She had formed opinions. When the session opened, she spoke. Not immediately. She let the initial presentations run, let the conclave members who had prepared their positions deliver them, because the presentations were good and they deserved to be heard, and she was also, in listening, reading the room at the granularity she had recovered over 4 months of presence, which members had read the same files she had and arrived at the same conclusions, which were triangulating toward a position rather than reasoning toward one, which were watching her. All of them were watching her, in the way they always watched now, not the careful peripheral attention of people monitoring an unpredictable variable, but the focused attention of people who had learned that the person at the head of the table was going to say something worth hearing. When the resource allocation discussion reached its natural plateau, the moment where the room had exhausted its prepared arguments and was waiting to see which direction the current would move, she spoke. She said what she had concluded from the file. She said it clearly, without excessive qualification, without the elaborate staging of uncertainty that had characterized her infrequent interventions in the previous years. She said it, and then she asked 2 questions that she had arrived at from her own reading, and that no one in the room had asked, and the answers to those questions changed the shape of the problem, and by the end of the session, a decision had been made that she believed was correct, and that the conclave, she could see, believed was correct, and more significantly, that they believed had been made by the right person. After the session, Counselor Dren fell into step beside her as she left the chamber. He was quiet for a moment in the way he used to be quiet when he had something to say that was not in the briefing materials. "The conclave," he said. "Yes," she said. "The session," he said. The conclave has not moved like that in some time." "No," she agreed. "It was good to see," he said, carefully, in the specific register of a loyal administrator who is not going to say you were gone for a long time, and now you are back and it matters. She stopped walking. He stopped beside her. "Dren," she said, "you've been with this administration for 31 years. 32, he said, "since the 3rd year of your reign. You were there for Orvesk." "I was there," he said. "Did you know," she asked, "that I wasn't coming back?" He was quiet for a moment. 32 years of loyalty had given him a very accurate read of what she was asking and why. "I knew," he said finally, "that you needed more time than you gave yourself. I didn't know whether you would find it." And when the attachés came, "I read their files," he said. "I thought these are the right people for this problem." He paused. "I thought it was worth giving them every available tool." She looked at him. "The custom summary," she said, "the long-term embed protocols." He met her gaze with the serene composure of a man who had been making things available for 32 years and had no intention of being caught directly stating what he had done. "I try to be comprehensive," he said, "in the materials I make available to visiting attaches." She looked at him for a moment longer, then she said, "Thank you, Dren, for 32 years." He inclined his head at the formal angle. "Empress," he said, and then, which was not formal but which was exactly right, "It's good to have you back." She walked on toward the garden. It was Kale who asked about Orvesk. He asked about it on a morning in the 9th week, when the workroom had taken on the comfortable disorder of long occupation, Soren's charts papering 2 walls, Kale's notebook replaced by a second one, the administrative summaries stacked in columns she had learned to read by their position. And he asked it the way he asked most important things, indirectly. Not why did you step back after Orvesk, but what did the Orvesk period require of you that nothing else had asterisk? She had been preparing to answer a different question. She adjusted. "Time," she said. "Sustained time of a kind that administration does not normally demand. The crisis lasted 11 months. 11 months of near-continuous strategic session, not decision-making in the way I usually mean it, where you read the briefings and hear the arguments and make the call and move to the next thing. This was something else. This was a single problem that did not resolve. Every session, the same problem, different angle, slightly worsened or slightly improved but never finished. You woke up inside it. You went asleep inside it." "That's a particular kind of exhaustion," Kale said. "A kind I didn't know existed before Orvesk," she said. "I knew fatigue. I knew the tiredness of a long decision cycle. This was different. This was the specific depletion that comes from sustained attention to a problem that does not respond." She paused. "By month 8 of 11 I had begun making decisions by a different mechanism than I was accustomed to. Not worse decisions necessarily, but decisions that came from a different place, faster, more instinctive, less deliberate. I had run out of the deliberate kind." "What happened at the end?" Kale asked. He was writing in his notebook, which he had learned by now was not a sign of distraction. He wrote when he needed his hand to do something so his mind could concentrate on listening. "The border was redrawn, the treaty was signed, the delegations went home." She looked at the window. "I sat in the treaty chamber for an hour after everyone left. I was trying to feel the end of it and I couldn't, not clearly, not in the way I had expected. I felt flattened. Like a document that has been folded too many times. And then I had 47 decisions waiting in the administrative queue that had accumulated during 11 months of crisis management." She looked at the delegation pile, not the actual pile, which Soren had reorganized months ago, but the memory of it, the way it had looked the morning her chief of staff laid it before her. "I looked at them and I understood, for the first time, that I was not going to be able to make 47 decisions, not in the state I was in. I delegated 3 portfolios to people I trusted absolutely, and told myself it was temporary." "And it wasn't," Kale said. "It wasn't temporary," she confirmed. "The portfolios ran well. Better than they had under my direct attention in some cases, because Counselor Aviath had been waiting for precisely the opportunity to demonstrate what she could do with real autonomy. And I found that I had, in the process of recovering from Orvesk, reorganized myself around the absence of those 3 portfolios. They didn't feel like absences. They felt like rest. And the others followed. Gradually, over years, I told myself each one was deliberate, each one considered, and they were considered. I'm not describing something that happened without intention. I intended every delegation." She looked at him. "I just never intended the cumulative shape of all of them together." Kale wrote something. He did not look up immediately. She had learned in 9 weeks that the moment he finished writing and did not immediately look up was the moment he was deciding whether to say the next thing. "Can I tell you what I think?" he asked. "You always tell me what you think," she said. "You just ask permission first." Because some things, he said, are better received when they're invited. He looked up. I think Orvask didn't break your capacity to govern. I think Orvask broke your trust in your own recovery. You came back from it, you delegated, and when nothing collapsed, when the empire ran, when your administrators proved themselves, you interpreted that as evidence that you weren't needed. But that's not what it evidenced. What did it evidence? That you had built something good enough to function without you being physically present in every room, he said. That's not the same as being unnecessary, it's the opposite. It means you built something worth coming back to. He paused. The crisis depleted you. The recovery was real. What didn't happen was someone telling you that recovery was complete and the work was waiting. Zavriel looked at him for a long moment. 41 years of managing what people saw, of holding the precise interior, whether of her private mind at a distance from every room she sat in. And here was this man, in week 9, looking at the interior whether as if it were simply information he needed to do his job. My mother, she said, would have told me. Yes, he said. She died in the 5th year of my reign, she said, before Orvask. I know, he said, it's in the administrative record, the 5th year. He set his notebook down. I'm sorry. It was simply said, not performed, not careful, not managed. 2 words in the register of someone who actually meant them. She said nothing for a moment. Then, she would have liked you. Because I read her books, he said. Because you don't flinch, she said. She said once that most of the people who worked for her were braver about everything except truth. They would face any crisis, any adversary, any decision. But when it came to simply telling her what was true, they went quiet. She paused. She said it was the loneliest part of the work. Kale looked at her steadily. Is it for you? Less, she said, than it was in week 0. He picked up his notebook again. She watched him write and thought, this is the person who would have sat with her in the treaty chamber, not said anything useful. Just been there writing, making the hour feel less like an ending that couldn't be felt. She filed that thought in the part of herself she had not yet decided what to do with, and they returned to the administrative documents, and the morning continued with its work. The months accumulated with the particular quality of time that is being used for something real. Soren produced, in succession, a network diagram of all 18 senior administrative positions and their decision dependencies, a timeline analysis of how the empire's approval structures had evolved over 30 years, a 3-page projection of what the restructured flow would look like if 4 specific nodes were changed over an 18-month period. The 4 nodes were not the administrators themselves. This was important. Zavriel understood it intuitively and appreciated that the document made it explicit. The nodes were structural, the specific bottlenecks, the unnecessary approval loops, the fiefdoms of necessity that had accumulated because good administrators in long-tenured roles naturally optimize for their own indispensability. Fix the structure, the administrators would adapt. People are not the problem, Soren said, when she asked him to walk her through the projection. People are almost never the problem. The problem is always the incentive architecture. Your brother says that people are always the problem, she said. He just means it differently. Soren almost smiled. He means that the incentive architecture is made of people's decisions, he said. So ultimately, yes, it's people. But you can change the architecture without changing the people if you're precise about where you pull. She had been present at 43 meetings in the past 4 months. She had asked questions that had resulted in decisions at 31 of them. The Southern Cluster's water mediation had been reopened with the correct legal framework. Aviath had restructured her documentation protocols, and more significantly, had begun attending a broader set of cross-portfolio meetings. The natural behavior, Kale observed, of an administrator who has realized that the highest authority in the room is once again attending. There were other changes, smaller ones, that she noticed mainly because she had started paying attention to the texture of the palace at a granularity she had abandoned years ago. The way the junior staff in the East Wing moved differently when they knew she was in the building. The specific posture of Counselor Dren when he was bringing her information. He thought she already had versus information he knew she lacked. The garden, the fact that she walked in it before breakfast now, and that this had changed the quality of the hours that followed, which had changed the quality of her attention in meetings, which had changed what she noticed, which had changed what she asked. "You went to the garden again," Kale said one morning when she came to the workroom at the 7th hour. It was not a question. "The second-row varieties are coming into the early phase of their bloom cycle," she said. "The timing window is brief." She sat down. "How did you know I went?" "There are still traces of morning dew on the hem of your robe," he said. "Second from the left edge." She looked down. He was right. She looked up and found him watching her with that expression. The one she had been cataloging for months now without meaning to. The one that was simply what his face did when he was paying full attention to something he found genuinely interesting. "You see everything," she said. "Not everything," he said. "I miss things constantly. I just write down what I don't miss." "And what do you not miss?" she asked. "About this?" "About Velora's. About," she paused, "about these mornings, this room, what we've been doing." He was quiet for a moment. Through the window, the garden was just visible, the second row, the pale blooms in the low morning light. In 3 hours they would close and not open again until dusk. "I don't miss," he said carefully, "the fact that you've been showing up to things for the right reasons. Not because we built a schedule and you followed it, but because you remembered what it felt like to actually want to be somewhere." He paused. "I don't miss the way the meetings have changed. Not just in outcomes, in the quality of the attention in the room. People pay a different kind of attention when the person at the head of the table is genuinely thinking rather than managing the appearance of thought." She looked at him. "What else?" "The questions you ask that aren't on Soren's briefing list," he said. "Those are the best ones. You asked 14 unrehearsed questions last month. 13 of them resulted in course corrections." "I don't need a count of my effective questions," she said. "What else do you not miss?" He held her gaze. The question had changed shape in the asking, and they both knew it. "The hour before sunrise," he said, "when the work is done and the day hasn't started yet and the reading is good." He glanced at the closed history book. "This particular set of problems, this specific room." "You're being careful," she said. "Yes," he agreed. "Why?" "Because I'm a guest in your empire," he said. "Because my commission ends in 3 months. Because you are an empress and I am a temporary administrative attaché, and the difference in what those words carry is not a small difference." She was quiet for a moment. She was aware of the precise quality of the silence between them, not absence, but density. "In Veloran custom," she said, "the administrative advisory relationship carries a specific protocol for when it becomes something else. There is a declaration. It is voluntary. It is made by the person of lower formal standing, and it creates no obligation. It simply establishes that the declaration has been made and is known." Kale looked at her steadily. He understood what she was doing. She could see that he understood, and that understanding something and being moved by it were not, for him, in competition. "I know the protocol," he said. "Soren read me the custom summary in week 2. He read me that specific section twice." "He knew," she said. "Even then." He said, and I am quoting him directly, "This is the section you will need." A pause. He was, as usual, correct. She looked at him. At this man who had come to her empire with a paper notebook and an unhurried quality of attention, and had looked at the thing she had been managing from inside for 30 years and said, quietly, "Let me show you what I see asterisk," who had not told her what was wrong but had helped her find it, who had been careful with her, careful enough to wait until she was actually here, actually present, in her own life and her own empire and her own mind, before saying anything that would require her full presence to receive. "Make the declaration," she said. He held her gaze for a moment. Then, in the formal Veloran phrasing, but in his own voice without ceremony, "I stand in this room and I tell you what is true. What I carry for you is not professional. It does not diminish the work we have done. It does not ask anything of you. It is simply known between us that it is there." The room was very still. "It has been there," she said, "for some time." "Longer than I've been precise about," he admitted. "Month 8, she said, "the session after the 3rd Southern Cluster meeting. You asked me why I planted the secondrow varieties, and I told you it was because my mother had grown them in the residential garden of the capital, and I had thought they were a practical thing to carry forward, and you wrote something in your notebook and did not show me what it was." He looked at her. "What do you think I wrote?" "I think," she said, "that you wrote that she wasn't talking about the plants." He reached across the table and turned the notebook to the entry from month 8. She looked at what he had written, in the cramped handwriting she had spent months learning to read at distance. She thought she was carrying forward a practical thing. She was carrying forward her mother. Note, she does not know that yet. Give her time. She looked at it for a long moment. "You've been waiting for me to catch up," she said. "I've been waiting for you to arrive," he said. "There's a difference." "What's the difference?" "Catching up implies you were behind," he said. "You weren't behind, you were somewhere else. You just needed the road back." She closed the notebook and slid it back to him. She stood, and he stood, and the distance between them collapsed to the actual distance of 2 people in the same room, rather than 2 people conducting a professional relationship across a workroom table. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Tell me." "I have been managing the distance between us since month 6, she said, consciously, with effort, because I was not at month 6 actually here enough to be unmanaged. I needed the remaining months." "I know," he said. I could see the management. Something in his expression shifted, warmer and more specifically him. "You're very good at it." "I'm very good at all the wrong things," she said. "You were," he agreed, "past tense." She reached up slowly, with deliberate intention, not managing it, and touched his face. The line of his jaw, the actual person in the actual room. He did not move. He looked at her with the expression he had worn since the first day in the receiving chamber. Nothing performed, simply present. "This is going to require some administrative creativity," she said. "Your commission ends in 3 months. Your counselor Dren," he said, "is very well organized. He's been discreetly researching the commission's long-term embed protocols for about 2 months." She stared at him. "You knew about that?" "Dren is your most loyal administrator," Kale said. "He's known about month 6. He's also the person who, in week 1, told me, very politely and without any explicit statement, that the Empress had been looking for something she had lost, and that any attaché who helped her find it would be regarded as having performed a service of significant value to the Empire." He paused. "I believe that was a form of permission." "Dren," she said, "has been managing this since week 1. Everyone in your orbit has been doing their version of managing something," Kale said. "You've spent 30 years creating an empire of very competent people who care about you. They've just been waiting for you to let them show you." She looked at him. Then she laughed, the sound of it unmanaged, arriving the way things arrived when she was not watching herself from the outside, and she realized she could not remember the last time she had laughed in this room. In any room. "You are," she said, "going to be unbearable about being right." "I've been right about most of this from month 8, he said. "I've been very restrained." "Soren," she said, "he knows all of it." "He modeled it around month 10, Kale said. "He's been wanting to produce a chart about it. I told him absolutely not." "At least someone in your family can be talked out of things," she said. "He can't, actually," Kale said. He just agreed to produce the chart after, not before. She laughed again, and it was still unmanaged, and it was, she thought, the correct sound for this room, for this morning, for the garden outside just visible through the window, the second-row varieties in their brief open hour before the sun climbed high enough to close them. She had planted those varieties herself. In the first year of her reign, she had thought she was carrying forward something practical. She had been carrying forward her mother. She had at last arrived somewhere she could know that. Soren's report, submitted to the Joint Administrative Commission at the conclusion of the 5th month, was regarded by the Commission's Senior Review Board as one of the most comprehensive structural analyses produced under the Compact. It was precise, well documented, and methodologically impeccable. It described, in full technical detail, the administrative restructuring of the Veloran imperial system, the identified bottlenecks, the projected outcomes of the 4 structural corrections, and the anticipated improvements in trade processing efficiency over the following 3 years. It did not mention the garden. It did not mention month 8, or month 10, or the specific night in the workroom when something had been said that was not administrative and did not require documentation. Kale's request to extend his administrative embed was approved by the Commission with minimal deliberation, partly because the Veloran Imperial Administration submitted a formal endorsement stating that the advisory role had produced measurable improvements in governance structure, and that continuity of the advisory relationship was in the Compact's long-term interest. Partly because Soren's report, read carefully, contained 6 footnotes that, taken in sequence, constituted a methodical argument for exactly this extension. Soren had written those footnotes with the neutral diligence of a man who had been right from month 10, and was documenting his own accuracy without stating it directly. He filed the paperwork from the Commission's capital, and then booked the next available passage to Velora's, because there were things he had been waiting to witness in person, and he was not going to continue waiting. He arrived on an early morning, when the night-flowering plants in the palace garden were still open, the brief hour before the rising sun closed them. The landing platform was staffed by the standard honor guard, and also by Empress Zavriel Orethan herself, standing with her hands at her sides, her formal administrative robe exchanged for the lighter weight she wore in the early hours, the garden still visible over her shoulder. She had come to meet him herself. He had not expected this, and then he had, because he had always modeled her correctly, and the model had always said, "When she arrives somewhere, she arrives completely." "Your report," she said when he was close enough, "was very good." "It was accurate," he said. "The footnotes were elegant." "Kale told me about the footnotes 2 months before I wrote them," she said. "He modeled the whole sequence in week 12 of the embed." Soren looked at her. He looked at the garden. He looked at the particular quality of her face, settled, present, like someone who had come home from a long transit and had fully unpacked, and thought, "Yes, this is what I projected from month 10. The accuracy is satisfying." He did not say this aloud. "The garden," he said instead, "you go in the mornings." "Since month 14, she said. "The second-row varieties. Kale sent me a description in month 8. He said you'd told him about them." "He wrote it in his notebook," she said. "He showed me the entry, month 8. "He showed me a different entry from month 8, Soren said. He paused. "Mine said she is going to be very good for him. The question is only timing." She looked at him. Her expression was the controlled version, the one she used in rooms, and then it shifted slightly, relaxed into something more actual. "He told me you've been wanting to produce a chart." "I still do," Soren said. "I think it would be very clear." "No chart," she said. "No chart," he agreed. He glanced at the garden. "May I?" "The second row is still open for about 40 minutes," she said. "After that they close for the day." He walked toward the garden, At the edge, he paused and looked back. "Empress," he said, "for the record, month 10 was my formal projection date, but the first read was week 4. "Week 4, she repeated. Kale asked me at the end of week 4 what I thought was going to happen. I told him, she is going to stop managing from the outside. When she does, she will stop managing everything from the outside. The work will do that. Presence does that if the presence is real." He looked at the garden, then back at her. "I did not tell him he was part of what was going to happen. I thought he should arrive at that himself." "He arrived," she said, "eventually." "Month 8 was not eventual," Soren said mildly. "Month 8 was comparatively fast for someone who is that careful." She looked at him for a moment. "You know," she said, "you and your brother are between you a very complete system." "We are," he agreed. "We've had a long time to calibrate." He looked at the garden, at the second-row varieties still open in the low morning light, pale and wide. "He told me you planted those yourself, first year of your reign." "Yes." "What did you think you were doing?" "I thought I was carrying something practical forward," she said. "A variety my mother grew." "And now?" "Now," she said, "I think I was carrying her. I just didn't know it yet." She paused. "I know a great many things now that I did not know at month 0. That is, I understand the intended outcome of the process." "The administrative restructuring," Soren said, with complete seriousness. "The administrative restructuring," she agreed. He smiled, she smiled. The morning light moved on the garden. He walked in among the second-row varieties, the ones she had planted herself in the first year of a reign that was, now, finally fully underway, crouched at the edge of the row and looked at them closely. He took out his notebook. He wrote garden, second row, all projections confirmed. She smiled, unmanaged. He underlined the last word. Then he put the notebook away and stayed among the flowers until they closed, because Kale had sent him a message the night before that said simply, "Tomorrow morning. The garden. Be there." And Soren Alec, who had been right about most things from week 4, had learned from his brother that sometimes the accurate prediction was not the point. The point was being in the room when the thing arrived. He was in the room. He was, as he had told Kale at week 4, exactly where he had projected he would be. He had not projected that it would feel like this, like arriving somewhere that had already been prepared for you, like walking into a space that had been made real by two people deciding to stop managing it and simply live in it. He added one more line to the notebook, worth the wait. "Do not tell him I said that."